One of my greatest things that I love to do is working on router tables. I'm a big router table guy, and as you can see with my collection here, this is just half of what I own. So no, I have two router tables in my shop, but I do love using those. And if I can do an operation on the router table, I'll do that prior more than going to the table saw, just for the I guess ease of mind of knowing that I'm less likely to be in any kind of a bad situation on the router table than I am on a table saw. And it's just I've got mine set to my height. So for those of you guys who are taller like me, you'd prefer we'll talk a little bit later about some of those that you can adjust to your height. So I can work on mine without stooping, and I just love working on that. And I do a lot of small boxes and stuff that requires a lot of joinery, and I'll get into some of the jigs and some of that later that I like using that work with router tables. So just start out, I'll talk a little bit about the tables themselves, about how you go about looking, what you should look for in a table if you were looking to buy one, or if you're looking to upgrade maybe from where you're at, or maybe you can just change some of the features. And the good thing about almost all these tables is that you can do this a la carte. You can buy just a fence, or just a top, or just the plate, the insert plate. You can buy a lift, you can buy the stand, you can kind of make your own stuff. You can make everything yourself if you want, and then just bolt a router to it. A simple router table can be nothing more than a piece of plywood with a fixed base router, or just a router screwed to the bottom side of it. That's technically a router table. What I like about a lot of today's router tables is that they've got a lot of features that really make life easier for you. It can add to your precision, add to your enjoyment of routing. With a router table, starting off here with talking about the tops, you got basically about 3 kinds of tops you can get, at least commercially. If you're making your own, you can make them out of whatever you want. But commercially, you have pretty much kind of an MDF core with a laminate cover on it, which is what we've got on the Craig table here, and the Rockler down at the end. Then you've got a Phenolic table, which is a solid plastic kind of synthetic material that are on the Woodpeckers, Jessam, and this Rockler table. And that's about a 3/4 inch thick piece. When it's MDF, it tends to be thicker, like an inch or so, just to get more stability to it. And then if you've got the other option then is a cast iron table. We've got on the Bench Dog, and Lee Valley, I believe, also makes a cast iron top. So this would work. You could buy just the top if you wanted. You can also buy these in cast iron that drop into a table saw, so you can put it in between the rip fence rails of your table saw and mount them in there. So there's a lot of good and bad things about each of them, and I'll kind of talk through that. The MDF tables, the reason they're thicker is because if it's not, they're going to sag under the weight of the router. So when you put the bigger the router in there, the more weight you got, and it might make that sag in the middle. You might ask, well, why is that really a problem? Well, it is if you're doing something that you're running across there and you need to have a perfect height consistently. Like if you were doing raised panel doors, you're doing this profile along here, routing that, and if your table sags in the middle, what's going to happen is your board's going to go across and stay flat, but what's going to happen is the bit is going to actually sag and is going to move down a little bit. So you're not going to get a perfectly true parallel cut to your board. So that's why it's important to have a top that does not sag. This Craig table has kind of a strut or a 3-sided channel reinforcements under here that mount and kind of help hold that and keep it from sagging. I've also seen some that run this way, but some kind of a reinforcement under there, metal, to keep that from sagging is a big help, because the bigger the router, and then if you add a lift, you're adding a lot more weight in there. You don't want that to sag. The difference is here, or the trade-off is that this is the least expensive top usually when you're getting into an MDF or a particle board kind of top that's been laminate covered. Those are usually your least affordable, your most affordable buy-ins. So they work well. As long as you keep them flat, it'll work well. When we move over here to the Phenolic tops, they work well because they're thinner, and it's a more rigid material than wood, so it actually will stay pretty flat. It's a little more of an upcharge for that to get to it, but it holds its shape well, and it'll work with any of the lifts and plates, so it's a good trade-off for that. The cast iron usually is the most expensive of the two. It's also a lot heavier, so you get that mass that dampens vibration, maybe caused by your router or anything. If you've got a big bit on there, it kind of wants to vibrate. That cast iron mass will help take some of that out of there. So that's a good thing to have. The downside with a cast iron top is what? Rust. Anybody ever have cast iron rust? That's you got to keep that treated and fight that. So it does not like moisture. So you got to keep that good. But we have that on our table saws and our band saws and other tools, and joiners, planers. So we're used to dealing with that. If you don't, Bow Shield T9 is the best thing to keep rust off there. If anybody's doesn't know about that, doesn't use it on their cast iron, Bow Shield, Boeshield T9. It's made by the Boeing company. So if you just Google that and find it, it's all over Amazon, places like that sell it. It's the best stuff for preventing rust on cast iron. So it works on all your tools, hand planes, table saws, anything. With the tops, some of the most important things here is make sure that you get something with at least miter track in there. So you've got a miter slot. It's important to have that for putting in some kinds of jigs. You might need a joinery jig or something that'll register from that, or you might need. You don't really use a miter gauge a lot on the router table, but you'll need something for feather boards that you can register to hold stock against the fence. So a miter slot is important, and ideally you can get combo track, which has got a miter slot and T-track combined. So a lot of the tables have that. Most of these do. So I think that's pretty standard anymore on router tables. But you can also buy that, and if you're making your own top, you can buy this track in aluminum and just route a channel and put it in there. But that's really handy to have for jigs and stuff, especially. The miter gauge is something that I rarely ever use a miter gauge on a router table. But sometimes it happens, and it's good to have when you do. The next thing is an insert plate. Just it could be as simple as this. This is a phenolic plate. They also come in aluminum, and some are also in plastic. Avoid the plastic at all costs, because the plastic just doesn't have the weight resistance. It'll sag in the middle and have the problems we talked about earlier. So you really just want to avoid plastic plates if possible. The phenolic is 3/8 of an inch thick generally to help resist sag, and it works really well. Aluminum typically is a 1/4 inch, so that they both work well at holding the router up and not sagging. You can mount your fixed base router right to this. You can also mount a plunge base if you wanted. It's just harder to work with a plunge base. I'll show you that in a little bit, but it's a fixed base is really the way to go. All right, then with the plates, the other thing is that you get into is there's two different sizes of plates in the world of routing. The standard is they're both 11 3/4 inches long. That's a typical. They're both the same length. The difference is most of them are 9 1/4 inch wide this way. The Rockler and bench dog plates are always 8 1/4 wide. So they're not compatible. So if you buy, say, a Craig table and a Rockler insert, it'll fit, but it's going to leave an inch of open space there. So you don't want to do that. It's also not going to line up with their levelers and all that. So Rockler plates really are made to fit Rockler tables, and that way, and the bench dog, they're compatible that way. But the Craig, the Jessim, the Woodpeckers, most of the others are all the standard 9 1/4 by 11 3/4, and they're interchangeable. So I can take the Woodpeckers lift and put it in the Craig table. I can put the Craig in the Jessim. I can move them all around. They're compatible. The only difference might be the leveling screws that are in the top to level the plate so it's flush with the surface of the top. Sometimes those don't line up necessarily with like this one. With the Craig table, the levelers are in the table. They're mounted underneath the table so that it just sets on them. And with Jessim and Woodpeckers, their leveling screws are in the inserts or in the plates, or in the lifts in this case. So if you were to put this into the Craig table, it'll fit, but the leveling won't work out necessarily. You have to kind of figure that out a little bit. So it might work, might not. And then also they have screw holes to mount down, so that you can secure, like if you wanted to secure the plate to the router table. These don't necessarily line up with each other's tables. So if you want to do that, they probably are they're more made to fit their specific tables. If you've got a pretty heavy router in there, you really don't need to put the screws into these and hold them down. Your router's not going to jump up at you. The weight of it usually will hold it down and be sufficient. But if you want to, it doesn't hurt anything. What I found a lot of times is then after you level the plate and then you put the screws in and do level it and cinch it down, then it changes the leveling. So you sometimes have to come back and redo the leveling after you do that. So in most cases, I just let the plate and the router just hang in those plates. So just put them in and let them go.